Well, this is our third and final conversation. We're talking with Doug Thorpe, the original originator of the team trust model. Doug, you've delivered a lot of great information in our previous two conversations about the topic and building a better team through this process. Let's kind of move on, and in a sense, we'll take this opportunity over the course of this conversation to kind of wrap things up. Kind of recap, if you would, the idea that we've been talking about, if you would, so everybody can catch up with us if they haven't listened to the previous shows.
Sure, Rick. What we were talking about in the team trust model you alluded to is really a 6-step model that helps understand the dynamic of building a high-performance team. Studies have shown us, specifically most recently, the good folks at Google did their own 2-year study on their high-performing teams. They called it Project Oxygen, and one of the biggest factors in the highest performing teams was something they call psychological safety. And if you read through the text of that report, what you come away with is a modern definition of trust. Being able, creating an environment where your team has a very high level of trust. So you say, all right, great, how do we build that? I've presented a 6-step model that starts with your people. They have to ask and answer the question, do I even want to be on this team? They have a purpose. Number 2, what is this team trying to accomplish? These are questions in the mind of each one of your team members. Step number 3 is the plan. They will ask, how will the team get this thing done? Number 4 is the practice. Some call it execution. They ask the question, what works and what doesn't? And then number 5 is performance. Once we get busy and get to work, how are we going to be measured? How are we going to know we're creating any level of success, and how can we improve it? And then lastly, number 6 is the payoff. Everybody's looking for that final reward, whether it's financial or psychological. I've reminded us in our discussion here that the payoff can come in the way of intangible results, as in a lot of work that our great nonprofits do in our communities. But getting these 6 steps operating at a high level, you will ultimately create a team that operates with a high level of trust. And that's why it's so important to think about each one of these. This is a dynamic wheel that creates momentum for your company and keeps people moving forward. And it almost becomes a kind of self-fulfilling momentum once kind of high velocity has been achieved.
You know, kind of backtrack a little bit. One of the things that you mentioned for the 6th step, the payoff. To me, that's one of the most challenging things to do, is to determine what the payoff needs to be so it does motivate. And in this case, also come back and help build the trust.
Right.
Any words of wisdom to the listeners about how to approach the payoff, whether it's monetary, non-monetary? How do you determine what works best with your team?
I think that's a great question, and it's an age-old challenge. I hear it all the time from my colleagues in the HR realm who are tasked with trying to maintain employee engagement, and they are constantly looking at that payoff aspect. And studies are telling us that the money reward is not always the answer. There are a lot of situations where people can be real happy with the money, but they're not satisfied with something else going on at the company. So I'm not trying to dodge the question, but the reality is I think there is no one-size-fit-all answer here. I think your own company dictates, and your own environment, your own industry may dictate the best payoff. Keep in mind, under the concept of my model that I'm presenting here, this payoff question is ultimately in the mind of the employee. It's like, am I getting the payoff I need and expect? And is it enough to make me want to continue here? And certainly, is it enough to make me want to continue at the high level that I think I've been contributing? You know, to get that feedback and know whether or not enough is enough, it's another example of the constant communication that has to be going on with your team.
You know, it's funny that I 100% agree with you on that. It's so many times business owners, managers seem afraid, I guess is the right word, to have the feedback about compensation or the payoff from the employees. And to me, I don't know how you do it without talking with them. Of course, as you build trust, then you have that trust, and the stronger the trust, the better that conversation is as far as the communication is straight and up front.
Well, I'm reminded of a story that happened to me in my early career. I lobbied for. I was a unit leader in my banking organization. I had about 14 employees, and I lobbied for some bonus checks for my people. They weren't going to be big, but they had been through a season of some really intense activity. I thought they had all done well, and I decided to submit for some bonus checks. Well, like I said, they weren't going to be particularly big, but it was going to be more of the gesture that was going to be important. What ended up happening, the checks got approved, but when they hit people's payroll, depending on where that person was on the tax schedule, it was either a serious detriment because it took them into a whole new tax bracket that took a lot more out of their check than they had been getting before, and the net was actually negative. And I was young and naive at the time, and nobody in HR warned me of that, and we did it. And I had about a third of my team more upset than they were excited about having gotten that little bonus check.
Yeah, I learned that lesson as well. In fact, now I encourage my clients to issue a separate check for the full amount and then just put the taxes on the regular payroll check.
Right.
In fact, I had a situation the other day that they actually did that. They did it before I got to them. I said, "Boy, you really understand, don't you?" That's a great story. Well, let's talk about some of the things that you've been, because and you've told, I know, one story on yourself, but you've been part of some successful teams. Tell us about what that looked like from your perspective of being a team member, not necessarily a team leader, or when you were in the case of what you just discussed, being a leader. What has your experience taught you or shown you?
Well, when I look back on my career, there are certainly some great opportunities I've had, including a small organization called the United States Army. Um, we certainly had a combination of team effectiveness there. Some teams were great to be on, others were not so great. I think anyone that's ever served in the military probably understands what I'm talking about. Um, you can find some great examples of team dynamics there. Uh, Certainly, I was not a part of it, but you think of elite squads like the Navy SEALs or the Army Green Berets. The training there gets you to another point. Talk about clarity of purpose. I think those are pretty high examples to look at. But for me, one of the moments in civilian life that I reflect on in my early career, I had joined a local banking organization in the Houston area called Texas Commerce. And I had no idea about the nature of that bank or the level of sophistication in how that bank ran. But being young and new to that industry, I just assumed everything we did there was some kind of normal approach. I only found out much later after I left the bank that it was a one of a kind. The leadership lab we had, I think, was phenomenal. The old saying is iron sharpens iron, and we definitely had a cadre of pretty high caliber bank officers and executives that ran our organization and modeled behaviors that we all needed to embrace. And talk about accountability, we had a very rigorous budgeting process that plotted our course year over year. And some people, quite frankly, didn't survive the scrutiny that budget demanded. But those that did, we had an organization that created 64 consecutive quarters of earnings growth. So we're talking 16 years of performance.
Wow.
With successive consecutive earnings growth. And there was definitely a culture there among the leadership. It was something that I don't think anyone ever questioned clarity. We've talked a lot about that during our time together here. I don't think anyone ever questioned the clarity and certainly not our purpose for being who and what we were. So that is a a model that's been ingrained in my mind and in my heart, and I try to share that with clients today on how to get there. And a lot of it comes down to, I'm going to depart here or a minute on a little tangent. A lot of it comes down to the communication with your employees, with your teams, to maintain that perfect clarity about your purpose. Why are you operating? What are you there for? What does it mean? What is our plan? Et cetera, et cetera. Keeping that communication wide open all the time is so incredibly vital to that.
Well, that's obviously a great piece of advice for a business owner today. Is there anything else that you could tell our business owners who are listening how to get the most out of their teams?
Well, I'll start by saying leadership is not automatic. If you have created a business, you may need to take a serious look in the mirror and ask yourself the question, am I really the right person to lead this? I may have the intellectual capital that started this business, but do I really have the leadership toolkit to make it go? And there are many stories that are now legend about creators that gave up the leadership because they were smart enough to know they didn't have it and they needed to learn it, or they needed to follow somebody else's lead in getting things done. They could stay in the room, they could have a seat at the table to continue to plot the vision, but they knew they just didn't have what it took to execute.
Yeah, that's a very, very difficult decision for the typical small business or business owner to succeed and allow even it. I find people have difficulty just succeeding, opening up the store, so to speak. I mean, and to get to that level, you're talking about some legends like you mentioned, because the exceptions are rare that somebody can start from scratch and lead it into millions, billions, whatever, wherever you want to go. Let's talk a little bit about, and you mentioned team leadership is not automatic, okay? But when you start a company, you have a team, you must be the leader. Well, that makes sense. Talk about that, though, that when I start a company, because I've met too many entrepreneurs that don't really look at themselves as a leader. They're a business owner, they're an entrepreneur. They'll pick all kinds of titles, but I don't find the title leader saying I'm the leader and I've got to think like a leader. I'm the boss, maybe. But talk about that.
I think that is exactly the heart of the challenge here for owners in so many companies everywhere. They they think of themselves as the owner, as the chief executive, or whatever title they choose to give themselves. But the the key interest here, the key question is, are you really leading your team? It's one thing to manage a team, to get them to understand the next button to push or the next screw to turn to get the work done, but that is ultimately just management. We get into the discussion of the difference between management and leadership. The best simple example, or I've heard of that, to explain it is that management is about process and leadership is about people. So you can manage a process all day long and you can get results. You can sell units, you can deliver service with nothing but a pure management approach. But if you want long-term success and even higher levels of success, you've got to delve into the ability to lead your people. And that's why the things I talk about in my six-step trust model really cover those bases, helping your team become a better team through real leadership.
Well, it all makes a lot of sense to me, and I appreciate, we've come a long way in this conversation, and there's some issues I'd like to take up when we start up again, specific things such as delegation, accountability. But for now, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Well, we went to the break. We've talked a lot about generalities in our multiple conversations, but there's some key areas. One of them is delegation, and we've touched on that. Delegating the day-to-day operations is sort of the top of that list, or delegating, as I brought up, the opening of the store, so to speak, to someone. Let's talk about delegation and why is it always hard for owners to let go?
It is hard for owners to let go. And whether you want to call it pride of authorship or an owner's lack of trust in the people that are around them, it runs the full gamut of rationale for not being willing to delegate. But when I work with my clients, when the subject of delegation comes up, I love a very basic definition that I learned a long time ago. Delegation is much like parenting. There is permission and there is protection. So let's talk about those two pieces. Permission is probably easier to understand. When you delegate to your team, you're telling them, I give you permission to go do this on my behalf. You can, when you're speaking, when you're acting, when you're executing, it's as though it was me, and that's okay. I give you permission to do that. Now, obviously, you do that with a backdrop of communication. You have some learning and training that goes with that to say to somebody, all right, now you get it, go with my blessing. The protection side is the one that I think confuses people when we start talking about that. Protection is not about defining a boundary around the permission you've given them. It's really on the after action side of it. It's what if you go out, you've got permission, you go out on my behalf, you do something and it's not right or it doesn't work out. What's going to happen? A lot of owners operate in a punitive way when that happens. The employee's sitting there thinking, well, I reached out and it didn't work out, and now you're going to punish me for it? Well, protection says, no, I'm not going to punish you. I've got your back. I'm going to cover. I will work with you and we'll make this right. We'll fix whatever happened that wasn't right or wasn't well. And it's okay. I told you to go do it. I told you you had that permission. It didn't work out well. Fine. I'll deal with it. Don't worry about it. And it's that constant cycle of giving permission and providing protection that really makes for effective delegation.
You know, I was listening to you and I got a little smile on my face because every time we talk about something, trust
Yeah.
comes up
Yeah.
as the foundational issue, which it is. And the fact that in that conversation that you say, hey, it's okay, we'll make it right, we'll do it.
That's right.
You've got to have trust between, in that case, the owner trusts the employee, what they did, and so on and so forth, and willing to step in and make it right. I've seen too many bosses just go off, on the employee, and there's no trust factor. You're tearing any trust down when you do that. So the whole idea is on a day-to-day basis, as a manager, as an owner, I need to think maybe first and foremost as I drive to the office or drive to the business about what can I do today to build some trust.
Yeah, it's a classic debate and understanding. Trust is very much a two-way street, especially in business. If you want your team to trust you and the company, well, you have to trust them. You have to demonstrate that, and as the owner slash manager slash leader, you have to be the one setting the course for that, and you have to trust first to allow your employees to come back and trust your system, your plan, your process.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, let's talk about, what about accountability? I mean, that's always on everybody's list. I need my folks to be accountable, or in turn, the manager being accountable to the employees. And transparency. Start with accountability. What's going on there?
Yeah, accountability, it just hit me. I think we've kind of been beaten up on owners quite a bit, and that's probably not fair. So any of you that have listened and thought I was doing that, I'm sorry. But here's where I'll turn it around. It is absolutely reasonable for an owner to expect some accountability from their employees. You hired them, you've given them an opportunity. There needs to be accountability. But it starts with you expressing a clear message of your expectation. You cannot keep moving the goalposts, is the phrase I've heard a lot on this topic. You can't change the goals and expectations on a regular basis. You have to set a course. You have to say, in your seat, in your job, here's what I need you to do. And whatever level that is, whether you want to measure it by volume or transaction count, transaction quality, there are a lot of measures out there, but the accountability has to start with that statement of expectation. Now, when an employee doesn't meet that expectation, you need to have a healthy conversation with them about it and not be punitive right out of the gate. You need to express your disappointment that the expectation has not been met and do that in a way that there is some opportunity for remediation, that the employee doesn't feel totally blown up and devalued by the company, but they see some light for opportunity to improve.
Yeah, very, very important. What about transparency?
Well, transparency, I think, goes hand in hand with that, and it's actually, in my mind, similar to what we talked about a minute ago with trust. If the leader wants transparency from their team, they're going to have to be transparent themselves. They're going to have to be able to relate to their employees. They're going to have to be able to share things with their employees. You don't have to get personal to the level you're divulging all your life at home kind of stories, but you have to be relevant. You have to be able to relate to them, and in that, the other thing about transparency from the leader's standpoint is being willing to admit your own mistakes. Everybody knows in our gut, I don't know who taught it to us first, but the old phrase, nobody's perfect. Well, there are too many owners and business leaders that believe they are perfect. And so when there's a mistake, they're either going to blame it on somebody else or find a way to rationalize it like it wasn't really a mistake, when everybody around the table knows it was. So that's where transparency starts, is just, owning up to it and say, you know what, guys, I blew that one. That's all on me. And if you can do that, you're going to start building a climate of transparency that all your other employees can rally around. Just like in the case when we're talking about delegation, if an employee's been delegated a task, goes out and blows it, if you've got transparency, they will be just like you were. They'll come in and say, boss, this didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. I'm very sorry. What do you want to do? And then you can have that moment to say, okay, I promised you protection. Yes, let's figure it out.
Yeah, well, that obviously makes a lot of sense. I would be remiss if I allowed us to finish this conversation and not mention a book that you've written. The book, The Uncommon Commodity, A Common Sense Guide of New Managers. Just take a second and tell us about the book and perhaps where we can get a copy.
Yeah, I wrote that book about 2 years ago, and I really had a passion. I talked to a lot of people, and maybe it's because I have 5 young adult children of my own, and I've watched them enter the workforce and take on leadership responsibilities. We have an odd tradition in our business world. We take our highest performer and we promote them to be a manager, and 9 times out of 10, what we've just done is ruined our best producer. So it's very important that those first-time managers get a shot at learning something about management and leadership so that they can do a better job in making their new first team responsibilities be more successful. It's funny, I wrote that book, and I've got it split up in a couple of topical sections about people and trust and management. But in my mind, I was writing it to first-time managers, as the title suggests, but a lot of my colleagues have read it, and they said, oh, goodness, I forgot about this. Thank you for reminding me. And so it's a good read for everybody, really, that is in any kind of ownership and leadership position.
Well, I appreciate that. And where can we get the book?
It is on Amazon.
Okay.
And through the bookstore at Amazon.
That's fantastic. Well, we've got about a minute left. Quick recap.
Well, I think the question about how do you build a better team, well, first you got to be a better leader, and the way we do that is building trust inside of our team environment. And I do have a 6-step model that's available for viewing on my website at dougthorpe.com/team trust. If you want to take a look, that's where to go, and be happy to talk with anyone that has questions about it.
And again, how can they best contact you?
Through my website, Doug Thorpe, that's THORPE.com, and in this case, /team trust, one word. That'll get you to the 6-step model we've been talking about. But all my blog content, my other articles and comments are there on the website.
I will tell you, if you're listening, there's a lot of great information there. I encourage you, if you just want to check and learn, go to that website. If you're going to contact Doug, that's fantastic as well. Well, we've had a great conversation, Doug. I thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. Building better teams by becoming a better leader. Great stuff. I encourage folks to take a look at his book, Uncommon Commodity, and build a better team for you and your business by being the leader that you need to be.
OneBestConsult.com, a community of small business owners where you as an owner can find answers to the most pressing business questions you have. Not sure who to turn to when you have a challenge in your business? Turn to the folks at OneBestConsult.com. That's the number one, bestconsult.com, where you can always find advice you can use based on common sense business experience. Join our community of like-minded business owners at OneBestConsult.com.